Hi, I'm Charlie Harp, and this is the Informonster Podcast. Now, today on the Informonster Podcast, I'm joined by the one and only John Demore. John, thank you for joining the Informonster Podcast today. And usually the way I start this whole thing is for the listeners out there, in case I happen to have a couple of stragglers that have never heard or know you, do you mind giving us a little about your background and your journey into healthcare?
Well, thanks so much, Charlie, for having me here today. I'm really excited to be here. And, I mentioned beforehand, I don't listen to a lot of podcasts, but I had a chance to catch up on the last 6 or 7 from Informonster. And I'm just really honored to be here. This is a great audience, great group that you brought together, and I think incredible content. And I'll start with just my background, how I got into this whole informatics domain, which leads to a lot of Informonster type problems for things. I always wanted to be in healthcare. My entire career was focused around being able to get in healthcare and solve problems. I thought I was going to be a doctor. That's what I really was pre-med and thought I was going to go off to. But I got some really good advice early on from some actual doctors. They said, well, why don't you just see if you can do something in healthcare and find it fulfilling? Because if you can do anything but be a doctor, that'd be a lot easier. And I listened to that advice, fortunately, and I went ahead and got into healthcare consulting, a little bit into healthcare investing through venture capital, and found that really working with data and figuring out how to be able to use information to improve care was really the thing that I was most excited about. And it was something where there was a lot of need. In the 2000s, as I was getting going, we were transitioning from things that were largely paper or maybe a hybrid of paper with some billing systems or maybe some ancillary systems into what we'll call now, fully fledged electronic health records or EHRs. I really found my calling for informatics when I was at Memorial Hermann. It was the largest healthcare system in Texas at the time. And we had 12 hospitals. They got more hospitals now. They had a lot of ambulatory facilities. And I ended up bouncing around a little bit, but ran their system-wide decision support program, which wasn't clinical decision support. I'm not a doctor. I always got to preface that. I play one on TV sometimes. Not a doctor, not a clinician for things. But I ended up running that department, and we did a lot of reporting for both the CFOs, but also for the CMOs, the chief medical officers, and the COOs as well too, to come up with clinical and operational data. And one of the projects that we ended up running was around being able to reduce the time between when results were shared for microbiology and when antibiotic selection was changed. And we called it the drug bug matching project.
Okay, that's cool.
Because we had to basically take back these microbiology results and say, all right, what antibiotics are going to work for what's been cultured on this patient? And then what actual antibiotics are being administered today, which often isn't an exact match. Sometimes you have some patients that are on some things that kind of work. Sometimes they're just fine. Most of the time it's really just fine. But then a small fraction, they really need a change because they're being just administered antibiotics that bacteria or that pathogen is going to be resistant to. And the consequence of this that we ended up implementing was it used to sit on the fax machine of hospital pharmacists, and they had to, before the end of their shift, review all these results. And it could take 2 hours. It could take 4, 5, 6 hours if things were really busy in the hospital pharmacy. And we turned that into an automated process, which they just reviewed the results and released them essentially immediately once they released from the labs. And patients got this treatment sooner. And the consequence of getting the right antibiotic sooner is that there were fewer sepsis cases. The patients got better sooner. And lower length of stay, pharmacists had to do less work. Everybody was happy. It was just a win-win all around. It was just through the intelligent use of information. That was my calling for informatics. I was like, we have got to be able to use our information most effectively. And I took the app that we developed, and this is really before we even talked about apps like on your phone, but it was an app, an analytic rule set, however you want to talk about it. I took it to our EHR vendor at the time, and I won't mention who they are. I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. But they basically said, John, this is incredible what you and the team have done. And I want to give credit. It was mostly the team. I was fortunate to be overseeing it. It's incredible what you've done, but we can't take that app, that analytic, anywhere else because the data models for how the microbiology results are stored and how the medications are stored is so different. And I said, this can't be. Like, you can't ask 6,000 hospitals all to be inventing the best way to do this. We have to find ways to share best practices. And then I found out that really what we needed to work on was the data that was underlying that. So I went and got my master's in informatics. This is back in like 2008, 2009 time frame getting started. And I was at the University of Texas School of Biomedical Informatics, which is now the McWilliams School of Biomedical Informatics, one of the first schools for informatics in the nation. And I ended up studying interoperability standards and how people were sending out this data, because I saw there was a really big need to be able to improve data and data quality, the data syntax, as well as the semantics for that information. And that led into what I did afterwards, which I ended up working at an EHR company. I worked at Allscripts for a couple of years, and then I ended up founding my own software company to do data normalization and a lot of magic. In between, it was called Diameter Health, and that was a good ride. And that we sold that in 2022. And I've been consulting, and I do teaching. I teach at Boston University now for informatics.
That's an awesome story.
Yeah. No, it's you've said this on the prior podcast. People are in healthcare for the right reasons. Not everyone, but the vast majority. People are here because we want to improve care. We know that we know our healthcare system really wasn't engineered like a system. It wasn't designed to work together the way we need it to get patients the best care possible. People are here for the right reasons, and we're all trying to do that in our own way that we can help push that boulder up the hill.
What I find is that people that use the term to describe some part of themselves as health informatics are lifers. I mean, I'm a developer, and if a developer can easily go from one market to another market, one industry to another industry, I think if you're a salesperson, you can spend time in healthcare. But if that phrase healthcare informatics is somehow woven into your DNA, you're likely not to go and work for, I don't know, Snickers or something like that.
I could never be a tire salesman. It wouldn't work. Not that I couldn't figure it out. It's just that I wouldn't be passionate about it.
There's a lot of cool data in tires, though, John.
Yeah, I mean, tires. I worked in consulting for a little bit, and people always want to throw you in these projects that have nothing to do with healthcare, and I just said no. But it's not because they're not fascinating for things. I'll give a side story for it. When I was at the University of Texas School of Biomedical Informatics, Ted Shortliff, president of AMIA, well known from his work with artificial intelligence way back in the day with mice and antibiotics. He was still lecturing there. He wasn't teaching a full class for it, but I get to sit on a lecture for him. And some of the work that he did on uncertainty and certainty factors and reasoning, they were able to use that in like, how does Folgers make the right coffee mixture all the time for it? And frankly, you can make a lot more money doing that type of stuff because like other industries need a lot of these things, and healthcare is got the most, I say, perverse incentive streams for how we pay for things and how we do things. The most well-intentioned people often enough, but the system, again, it's not a system. We call it a healthcare system, but it's really just a whole bunch of parts that we put together, and it works kinda most of the time, but it could be a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's got the issue that it's complex, it's personal, and it's critical. Mm-hmm. And I think when you look at those factors, it's hard to disrupt. It's hard to figure out how to incentivize change, other than passing laws, because that's an easy way to incentivize.
That's the easy out, but we're not going to get a lot more of those in the next couple of years, probably. So we got to find other ways to do it. One other thing that you talked about with informatics and lifers, which I think is so true, is part of what I actually lectured in just this last lecture in informatics at Boston University. We really get into the last lectures talking about what is this domain of informatics. And I think one of the key things that draws people to it is tremendously interdisciplinary too, which is you can't just wear one hat. You can be an engineer and come into it, but you can't just say, well, I don't need to know anything about the use case here for how the heart works or how sepsis works. You have to understand some of the clinical nature. And same way, if you're a clinician, you can be the best doctor and the best nurse in the world and be horrible when you get into informatics, because you got to deal with data and you got to deal with data structures and you got to think about things like standards and data quality and terminology for this information. And I think the kind of the secret sauce to that is you also have to understand the system, which is, unfortunately, our system isn't just about doing the right thing for the patient. There has to be the right incentive structure for things to get adopted and for things to be permanent. Now that can often align with doing the right thing for the patient. But you just have to realize that doing the right thing for the patient doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be easy to do. You have to kind of find a way to move the needle for incentives, for quality measures, for population health, for risk adjustment. All those things kind of need to move in the right direction.
And also kind of push against the mentality that you're not just trying to check the box. It's the spirit of the law, not necessarily the letter of the law. But yeah, I think that when you talk about the interdisciplinary nature of health informatics, it's kind of a mixture of, smart, curious, passionate. Because as an engineer, I've worked in other industries. I've worked in manufacturing. I've worked in finance. But when I got into healthcare, I don't know, it's like a switch was flipped in me. And when you get into, how does a micro turbidity scanner work? What does it mean when it's looking for growth or no growth, and when it's analyzing sensitivity versus susceptibility?
You've got to be curious.
And it's what I always tell the developers that work for me is it's not just about building something based upon a set of requirements. You got to kind of grok it.
Yeah.
You got to understand. And you almost, like, I was at First Data Bank for 10 years, and people say, I'll talk to people and say, are you a pharmacist? I'm like, no, but like you said, I play one on TV. Yeah. I know enough about pharmacy to be interesting and to be dangerous, and to know that albumin and Billy Rubin aren't two guys I went to college with.
That's a good one.
So what are you working on today? What are you excited about? I know we're going to talk about data quality, but and I know that you're teaching. And you see, I see your posts on LinkedIn, and you seem to really love doing that, and that's awesome to see.
I do, because it's all about, I think about how healthcare is not going to be solved by you and me, Charlie. Unfortunately, we're going to leave a lot of problems.
Oh, come on! It's not too late for us, John.
Well, no, we got more to do. I'm not saying we aren't going to do great stuff for things, but I think the next generation we're going to need more informatics professionals in the future. So teaching is an inspiration for that. Some of the things I've worked on in the last, 3-4 years, since the acquisition of my software company, is getting back to the standards. It's really funny. When I first found my way, when I was doing research back in grad school, to the HL7 community and the standard stuff for it, I said, oh, dear God, I do not want to write these things. I do not want to do it. I would literally say in meetings that I don't want to write your standards. I just want to use them. Because at the end of the day, coming up with the right data model or a slightly different data model, if we all just do it the same way, we'll be 10 times better than we are today, even if we don't agree entirely that was the right way to do it. And I just wanted to implement data standards is what I really said, and to have questions answered like, well, how do you represent this data in that CDA standard, the HL7B2 standard, or now that FHIR standard for things. And in the last 3-4 years, I have actually now become the thing I didn't think I wanted to be, which is I've started writing a few of them. I got pulled in along the way to become an editor onto the CCDA standard while I was when I was at the software company. So that's a big standard. It's how we share clinical documents. It was forced on us by meaningful use and by EHR adoption, but it's got an incredible traction. I talk to people, and sometimes they don't know just how much CCDA is exchanged in the United States. Some of the recent estimates are 9 billion a year. You just have to kind of put your head around that. 9 billion a year. Well, 9 billion what? 9 billion medical summaries, which could be, it could be hundreds of billions of lab results and allergies and medications that are associated with that. And you'd say, well, 9 billion, how much is that? Well, there's only about 1 billion care interactions in the ambulatory setting per year. There's 40, 50 million hospitalizations, 100, 200 million ER visits. We're exchanging a CCDA multiple times for every actual care encounter we're doing, which is just kind of blows your mind when you actually think about that. So interoperability today is not the same problem that we had when I got started, which is just that the data was stuck and it did not flow. And it flew, but maybe on a fax machine, right?
Yeah, maybe my RS-232 connector is
we have broken down the data flow problem, but now we've got an ocean of data, and we get some variable quality. Some of this is potable water. We can drink it, we can use it, and a lot of this stuff is just questionable in terms of, is it complete? We got to ask questions about that dimension. We could ask, is it actually representing what was there? Is it plausible? For these things that you've really picked up, I think, in the PIQI framework is just incredibly exciting, and I've been obviously a big fan and following that for the past couple of years. So I got to writing the standards because you asked about what I was doing recently. I'm writing some standards now. So I've continued to do work on the CCDA to FHIR project from HL7, so how to do transformations between CCDA and FHIR. I was an editor. I helped that one get published. And then most recently, we have the International Patient Summary, which a lot of people say, oh, international patient summary, isn't that just for international travel for? And I say, no, it's really actually much more about to be the successor to what we used to call the CCD, or the continuity of care document. It is one of those CCDAs that we exchange all the time in the US. It really is meant to be the FHIR-based format for how we will share data as patients move from one provider to another provider, but they don't have a real-time FHIR API connection where they can just query for all this data magically. We have to send a package of data. It's a bundle in FHIR. People are kind of accustomed to that. Its first thing is a composition, so it's a type of document in FHIR. And you put together the same sections you put together in a CCD, which is you put together, here's your allergies, and here's your meds, and here's your procedures and problems, and immunizations, lab results, vital signs, etc. But now the nice thing is that the CCD, many people might not know this, was a US standard. And because now we're starting with the IPS, the International Patient Summary, that's an international standard. So now we can actually get on board and have the rest of the world be talking the same language with us, which is it's been a really fun thing to work on in the past 4 years. And I've been very proud to be part of that project. And again, I've not done I'm an editor, but I haven't done the heavy lifting. There's been people who've been working on this for a decade to get this off the ground.
I think having that least common denominator set of information that we can exchange across borders is really important for a lot of reasons. When you look at the IPS community, which countries are like super active in that community?
Well, the interesting thing is because we have so much CCDA in the United States is not leading. We're going to be following. There's a project that actually just got announced in September that the US will be doing its own version of this. But we're following in this respect because we actually are exchanging CCDAs.
Yeah.
And a lot of other nations never did that. So in Canada, they still got PDFs and faxes flown around. And that's really suboptimal for things. So Canada was one of the first nations to really pick up and move this forward. About 4 or 5 years ago, they really started the process of using this for domestic exchange, and now several provinces have rolled that out as kind of their standard. They don't call it the IPS because they're using it domestically. It's called the PSCA, or Patient Summary Canadian Edition, but it follows the format of the IPS and can be used internationally as well. The IPS use case, and use cases are important because it keeps you scoped, it keeps you focused on what you're trying to do. Our use cases for unscheduled cross-border care. Now, cross-border, clearly nations are a border, but cross-border isn't just national borders. It can be regional, provincial, state borders. It can be organizational borders. It can be just you're going down the street to another hospital and they don't use the same EHR instance. That's a border. Graham Grieve, kind of godfather for FHIR, loves to say your front door is a border. It is, when you leave the house for it. So anytime you have to communicate information across a border, for unscheduled care and to have that kind of baseline of information, as you said, the IPS is a good fit. And we're seeing lots of nations. So other nations that are doing, besides Canada, there have been several places in Europe that have picked up. Brazil has had a pretty active usage for it. Australia and New Zealand are going along this path pretty well. And I'm sure I'm missing some nations in there as well, too. Actually, one of the ones that is a cross-national project is the Hajj pilgrimage. Actually, for the last 2 years, when pilgrims would come, they actually have to get pre-clearance and they have to collect data. Malaysia, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and Indonesia are all using the IPS to provide that baseline of information. So if you're on pilgrimage to Mecca and you get ill, the first thing that they can look at is your IPS from your care providers. So they have a little bit of baseline for where you are.
That's very cool. And I'm not trying to turn this into gotcha journalism with some of these questions. So I'm going to put you on the spot.
Oh, go for
it. I'm going to go into the nerd weeds a little bit. So if I'm creating an IPS and I'm exchanging data from one region to another, let's say in Europe, from my time back in some of my previous lives, one of the things that I was acutely aware of is, for example, different countries have different national drug terminologies, variants like DMD and RStorm in the US. Is there, when you're looking at producing IPS, are there semantic or terminology binding norms, or do you really get what you get and you make the best of it based upon the country of origin?
Well, I'm going to give that's a great question. I'm going to give a multi-part answer to this.
Sure.
The first thing is that we have textual fallbacks, and that, a little bit in Fire, we actually did a lot of work on text and text representation in IPS because a lot of Fire is like, oh, now you get the code, you don't need to worry about the text. Well, we're moving beyond text for it. And in this cross-border scenario, you actually kind of need that as a baseline because there can be some times where you don't understand. If you're coming from the US, you might be sending an RX norm code for medication. And I'm going to mean a hoot to people in Netherlands if they're trying to carry you for things. So the first thing you'd say is you want to have a textual representation for it. And that also helps when you might be doing translation. Remember that you're going to get an IPS produced in the US, it'd be in English, but it's not going to be in Dutch when you land in the Netherlands. For things. So text fallback is the first baseline for this. But we actually have been working because there are 5 standards development organizations that work through the Joint Initiatives Council on IPS. They're part of what's called IPS Coordinating Committee, IPS-CC, and one of them is SNOMED. So SNOMED has made available a subset of their ontology, SNOMED-CT, available worldwide for free because not every nation licenses SNOMED yet. In the US, we license it, so we're a national affiliate. A lot of other nations do it, but not everywhere. And the nice thing is that, while you don't have the millions of terms you have available in SNOMED, you've got tens of thousands, but those, we try to pick common ones that end up in the SNOMED IPS terminology, and they're freely available worldwide so people can use them. So you can refer to your medications. So how did this actually work on the wire, Charlie, which is probably where you want to get? You send that RX norm code because that's what makes sense locally. But if you can translate that to a SNOMED code or to a WHO ATC code for it, those are freely available worldwide medications. Terminology. SNOMED's not quite as good as medications as it is a lot of other places for it. But if you can send those globally available terms, please do that as well, because that makes it more likely that recipients are going to be able to understand that information on the other side of the ocean.
But to your point, the nice thing about it is even if you don't have the means to ingest that data and process the codes natively, you can still render that so a human being can see that you're on these maintenance meds and you're doing this and you're doing this. So even as just a representation, I think that that's hugely valuable for that kind of thing. It's very cool work that you guys do on the IPS.
Well, thanks so much. It's been it's been a real pleasure, and it's been fun because a lot of my software work was all based upon US health information exchanges, US payers for it, and we're weird in the US. You get this refreshing perspective when you go deal with healthcare overseas because it's a lot different for how they approach things.
Yeah, when I was spent time in China and in Australia and the UK, it is very different because the way we look at the data we produce in the US is it's very, it's kind of native to how we do healthcare in the US. It's very billing oriented. It's and I often think that the next generation, EMR, the next generation truly clinical EMR is unlikely to evolve natively in the U.S. And I don't love saying that, but I think that as long as we're treating EMRs like cash registers, is that a terrible thing to say? Then they're not going to be clinical first. And I think you need to have something, and maybe we'll come up with something that we bolt on to our current processes, and maybe it'll evolve out of ambient care or something. Maybe AI will just synthesize it out of nowhere. And
no, it's not going to be out of nowhere.
Ride in on digital wings. No,
we're going to need some high data quality to feed AI if we're going to actually make it work, Charlie. And that's
absolutely right.
That's I was thinking about data quality before I came on here for it, and it's so funny you mentioned AI because I think that a lot of people. I've actually been at board meetings. I won't say where, but I was at a board meeting and I got a question when I was giving a board presentation. I wasn't a board member of that organization. They said, well, our health information exchange doesn't need to worry about investing in data quality because AI is just going to fix it all. And I could not grasp that question in terms of how insane it sounds for it. It's like when people started the internet and says, you know what, the internet, we don't need money anymore. Money's like an input to making the internet work, right? If you can't buy things, you can't transact, you can't do anything for it. The internet didn't obviate money, it made money more important. AI, data is the input to making all of these things happen that are so immensely valuable. And yes, generalized pre-trained transformers, GPTs, when they transform that data, they have a deep representation that, is something that can be common across many input representations of that. So it is like a normalization aspect for it, but that actual layer change, first, it's not exposed, it's hidden, it's a hidden layer, right? That representation for it, so humans can't interact with it, and it changes every time they update the software. So that's not terminology, that's not standards. It can help us in so many immense ways for it, but when you can feed better data into it to get started, you're just going to get better outputs for these things. Data quality is not going to become less important in the age of AI. It's going to become more important. Now, I'm not. People are going to disagree with that, but I don't mind saying it.
I'm not going to disagree with that. I think that one of the things that scares me is that we're doing all these things around AI and where it's providing care, where it's summarizing care. And I always try to remind people that AI, language models, are a rear-facing technology.
Yes.
It takes content that was created by us historically, and it's using that to do essentially a weighted probabilistic decision process. And one of the things that I learned when I was with Zinx is that every 6 years, the evidence changes, and we decide we're totally wrong. Those things we're doing, oh, that was crazy. That was actually hurting people. We're gonna do it better now.
Margarine's not good for you. Let's have butter instead. I mean,
that's right. That's right. Eat bread. Now I'm not allowed to eat bread. Make up your mind. I don't know what's gonna. I'm supposed to start next week. I'm gonna start smoking cigarettes. I think that the problem we have is we're relying on history, and we're relying on the quality of that data to drive models to help us make decisions going forward. So the models are built on questionable, uncertain data. We're prompting it with questionable, uncertain data, and then we're taking actions on that. And I think AI is, I think GPT, chatbots, generative AI, large language models, whatever you want to call it. I think it can be a huge accelerant because of its capacity for dealing with large amounts of data and identifying patterns and helping us distill things out. But I'm still, as someone who used to build decision support for a living, I'm still a believer in creating deterministic guardrails.
Yes.
So that I can point to that and say the reason why I decided to do that is because of these inputs, this process chain, and that output. As opposed to I threw it into a machine and it told me to do it.
I actually talk about this when we go over LLMs and AI and a lot of these things, which is they're great tools. They're going to change the world. Like, let's start with that as a baseline. It's not that you can ignore these things for it. But when you can do a logistic regression or you can do a rule set and come up with the same outputs, do that first. One, it's computationally so much cheaper, but two, you can explain it. Like, this is why your risk of readmission or your risk of heart failure or death is this percentage. It's because of these 5 or 10 or 15 factors that go into it. It's so much more understandable to the average person rather than saying, well, it's a black box and we don't really know why the AI said that this was a high risk type of thing for it. If you can get the same or often better outcomes by doing those things, start there. When you're not getting the results you want through deterministic, through rule sets, through the more basic math, that's when you start looking to AI to start working with big data.
Or combine the two together.
Oh,
I was, like you guys, like your history, we do a lot of the semantic normalization stuff. And we have a bunch of algorithms. We do all kinds of cognitive processing. And I've had people say, well, Charlie, I could just use AI to do my semantic normalization. And I'm like, I can get you like 95% of the way there with deterministic logic in a repeatable way. Are you sure you want to throw that away and go to the pachinko machine and just bet everything on the fact that that's going to come up with something equal? You can use it for the 5%.
Yep.
And if it can pick up the phone and call the source and say, what the heck is X1755327?
Yep.
It might be able to do something that a deterministic algorithm can't do. But
well, I'll tell you a little one about data quality, which will relate to your kind of pharmacy background for it, which is when I was at my software company, we actually developed an aspect for medication sig parsing. So to be able to understand any way that those instructions, take one tab by mouth twice daily or one tab PO BID, understanding that those are the same words. And people immediately said, well, we should just use NLP for this. But remember how many CCDAs I talked about processing? If you're processing 1 billion CCDAs a year and each CCDA has, let's say 20 medications on average, you'd say, oh, what? Nobody has 20 medications. Actually, some people have a lot more when you start looking at stuff for it. Let's say 20. So now you get 20 billion medication entries for it. if how many milliseconds can you spend parsing each one of those if you actually want to get through all the data? And if you're throwing each one of those out to a LLM or an NLP engine for it, you're talking about hundreds of milliseconds before you get a response per medication.
Yep.
Wow, use deterministic things to get you 95% of the way there. And then maybe for that other portion, you can spend a little bit more time and spend a little bit more money on that portion. But we found that actually it's not 95%, but for med-cigs, it was like 99% of them could just be deterministic parsed. So
they have to be human readable. They're predictable. They have to be unambiguous because a provider or somebody has to read it and interpret it. So you're absolutely right. I think that in those types of scenarios, the deterministic algorithmic logic should be used. Now, when it comes to things like language models, the data prep, creating data, saying what are all the ways I can say this, I think there's a lot of potential there for AI, and we've been looking at how we can leverage that. And I also think assessing when you have a bunch of options, what's my best option here? So once again, assisting a human, catalyzing them, helping them make a decision faster. I think there are some really great opportunities for AI there, and who knows how AI is going to change.
Well, one thing I've definitely known, because I've known a few, being in informatics, you get to realize that there's a lot of terminologists out there too for it, and terminologists like some of your MVPs, people who can understand terminologies and understand how to work with a transitive closure of SNOMED. I was like, I still have trouble with all this stuff. But with AI, you can turn those terminologists into they can vibe code solutions to problems that they couldn't do previously, because they're not coders, but it's amazing how AI as a tool is going to empower you, but it's not magic. It's not going to solve all your problems. And now, hey, we don't need to worry about interoperability or normalized data, or we don't, we're going to need to continue to worry about those things, work on those things. But now we've got some great tools to help us do these fixes a lot faster.
The trick is for people not to be lazy with the technology. I've done some code and I've leveraged different LLMs. I've used Claude, I've used GPT, and I've had them write code snippets and blocks of processing logic. And what's funny is one of the differences is when I do that, I always go back and look at the code, because sometimes I learn things. Sometimes I'll learn some new way of doing it that wasn't around when I was doing it for a living, right? And sometimes I'll look at it and I'll say, why on earth did you make that decision? And I think that what's important is, it's great if AI can write code that would have taken you as a human 40 minutes to write it, and it can do it just like that. But I think you still have to have the wherewithal and the knowledge and the experience to go back and look at it and say, well, that's not what I asked you to do.
Absolutely. But it makes you much more productive because you're an editor of code rather than the full content creator. And the other thing, by the way, I know you talked about your love of documentation. You're better than me at this. I was horrible at commenting my code, and I gotta say, I've used Cursor and Copilot and a few other ones. Oh gosh, they force you, because every function is commented. You're like, oh my gosh, this is like how I should have been coding the entire time for a lot of it. So it can put you into some good practices. But I agree, it does not eliminate the need, but it can make you more productive.
Yeah, I agree. So, data quality. I appreciate when you look at what we're doing with PIQI. I appreciate your kind words about PIQI. And honestly, for me, it's been a great experience. It's been a lot of fun intersecting, with the folks in the standards. It's really been my first standards foray. And there are aspects of it that are
infuriating.
No, I don't get mad. But it's one of those things where it's almost like when somebody asks a question, I know a lot of people that would get frustrated with that, but I appreciate the fact that some person in their own time took the time to read a document to ask me an insightful question about something. I kind of step back and go, the fact that they took the time, they showed me the respect, they went and looked at it. I might say, okay, now I got to explain what this word means or why I chose this word. And a lot of times I just say, yeah, I just chose the wrong word. Tell me what you prefer, and we fix it. But I temper any frustration I have when I'm going through that process with a deep appreciation that somebody else took the time, because we live in a world where a lot of people don't read emails, they don't look at things before they come to meetings. And when people do that, I just feel a deep sense of appreciation because, it makes everything work. And honestly, going through this process with HL7 and going through the Alliance work groups, sometimes I have to explain myself. Sometimes it makes me think about why I said what I said.
Yeah.
And sometimes, more often than not, I come away with something that's better than
Yes.
what I had before.
I, I think, the community of HL7 is the most valuable asset. It's not any of the standards they produce for it. It is the people that are brought to this, and they are thoughtful and they spend time. And a lot of them are people who carve out time like as part of their job, right? It's not their full-time job. They still have to go back and code or go back and do oversight for projects for it, but they make time to show up, to read the standards, to be informed, and then to give feedback for it. And it is, I use the word infuriating kind of in jest, but it's hard because you do get pushback and you have questions, and they're generally good questions, which means you got to think about it. And you're like, I haven't thought about it that way. And they got a point. And sometimes it's easier when they don't have a point. You can just kind of, that's not really where we want to go. But they come back with good questions for it. And I think about it like that phrase that's always used, democracy is not a great form of government. It's just the least bad version of what we've tried to date for it. Consensus-based standards making is not the most efficient way to go forward, but it's like the least bad way that we've figured out. Bring together a whole bunch of stakeholders across the community, give them an opportunity to and I'm so proud and honored that you guys are balloting. I know it's an informative guide, to get started with PIQI for it, but I'm so proud that you're balloting it. You're putting it out there in the domain for public to comment on, for public to give feedback on, and it's making it better. I think I've already seen improvements since you guys get started, 6, 9, 12 months ago. And I think it's just going to be such a tremendous asset. I've been talking about this my entire career. I used to actually have this on my website before we had a marketing team, Charlie, who said, why don't you not put quotes on your website? It looks cheesy. But it's Lord Kelvin, which you cannot manage that which you cannot measure. Or I don't know. Deming also said, I think it's a similar aspect for this.
He said, if you can measure something and explain it in numbers, then you've begun to understand it.
There we go. That is.
I love the Lord Kelvin quote. It's a great quote about data quality.
And that's what we need, because we jumped in healthcare because we always know where we want to go. We want to go to higher quality. We want to go to value-based care. We want to go to say, hey, we know that we're improving colorectal cancer screening, diabetes management, all these things that are really important for patients for it. We jumped to the quality measurement without asking the intermediary question, which is the data, or are the data feeding these quality measures of appropriate quality before we try to actually do the outcome measure for things. And I think PIQI is really filling a need and a gap for it. Now, I'm excited with what other organizations are doing, right? NCQA is doing some work on it. I think there's a lot of coordination and movement in the community, but I think that you're pushing this, again, going back to what I said earlier, you're pushing this rock up the hill. It's not easy work to move this forward. And frankly, it's harder. It's much easier just to say clinical architecture's got some software, buy our stuff. You're actually moving this forward in a consensus and standards-driven process, which benefits everybody. I think that there's really good benefits for clinical architecture too, but this is something that's great for the community. So I really want to say thank you for that. And I think that's, it's exciting to be part of that. I gave a few JIRA tickets on the first ballot for things, and I think it's great progress to see what's moving.
And I really appreciate your involvement in it and everybody's involvement. I think that with PIQI, what I have to keep explaining to people, because people say, Charlie, we check our quality. We have 8,000 quality checks in our data. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, yeah, there's a difference between a developer doing a check-in schema than the kind of quality checks we're talking about in PIQI. And the biggest difference is it's not a replacement for the quality checks that people are doing when they land data in a repo and they're checking for referential integrity and all these other things that they validate. The difference is that quality goes from being an adjective to a noun, because we have a scorecard and we're saying, according to this rubric, is your data quality or not? Because one of the things, and I don't know if you encountered this in your career, I'm sure you have, is that when you're selling things that improve the quality of data, the answer you get is like that Monty Python skit where, we're in search of the Holy Grail. Oh, he's already got one. The data quality is fine. Yep. I told them we already got the one. With like, oh, our data quality is fine, and I'm like, are you sure? Have you looked at it? And the thing that I love about PIQI, and the thing I said to my team is, because we were debating this early on, that we can make a product or we can make a difference, and if we can have a scorecard that we can agree as an industry, this is what quality is. These are the things we measure for this use case. And people put the data in that. It's not a question of, I have great quality. The score will tell you if you have good quality.
Yeah.
And the other thing that came up, it came up at the NCQA. I did a presentation at NCQA. And the question was, what's a good quality score? I said, well, if the rubric articulates the minimum requirements to be usable, the minimum score is 100%, right?
Yeah.
Because if you build a rubric that says, this is what I need, and you don't give me that, 100%. Now, you could have an arbitrary scale, and for me, anything below 100%, the purpose of that is the second I in PIQI, which is improvement.
Yep.
What do I need to do to get to 100%? It's like being in college. What do I need to do to get the A? And so I've been really humbled and excited about all the interest and activity around it. And Levitt Partners has been great. Folks like you that have added your brains to what we're doing. And for me, it's one of those things where when you can do something, when I look at somebody like Graham Grieve, when you can do something that makes the industry better, that's something you can take away, as you ride off into the sunset. You can say, hey, I was part of that thing that made a difference. And so I'm very grateful to everybody for being involved in it.
Well, I think you said it well. I think that also just the way that you've started to categorize this, one of the ways that I tried to use words to talk about this, which is like, there's a syntax or syntactic normalization that needs to get done for it. Like, hey, when you have something in quotes, you can't have a space or in this code, this code field for it. That is not the level that PIQI is really aimed at for it, which is not trying to get to that syntax, which is part of XML or JSON or whatever data format that you want to use. Yeah. It's not something that fits nicely into schema. It's much more of those rules of like, does this make sense for it? If you've got a vital sign for a patient and it's 12,080 milligrams of mercury, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that from a syntactical presentation aspect, but that's not within the range of a human being, at least. I don't know, maybe there's something out there that can have that blood pressure, but what happened, which is the nurse, rather than writing 120/80, the systolic diastolic fields just get all crammed in that one field.
Yeah.
And, this is something where we need to have the rubrics to work on this. And I think having those different dimensions, like some of them are just going to be, pass or fail, like 100%, or it's a no-go for it. But there are some things where we're not expecting every medical diagnosis that's ever been done on every patient to always have an onset date. It's not always known. It's not always relevant to ask for things. But if you want to say, hey, are we doing good documentation? You need to have a way of saying, well, what was our rate of onset date documentation 5 years ago? And are we better than that today? One of the things I shared it when we talked about at a previous meeting, which is like line code normalization. Everyone would kind of agree we're probably using a lot more line codes today than we did 10 years ago in healthcare. But at what rate? Were we 50% and now we're like 70%? Or were we at 40% and now we're at 42%? I don't know. Nobody can answer these questions. And until we come up with the right frameworks like PIQI to be really put together, SAMs, put together kind of logic models of what we're going to measure, and then do that consistently over time, we're not going to be able to make the improvement that we want to.
Yeah, it goes back to Lord Kelvin. If we start to measure it, we can start to change it and observe the change we're hoping to see, right?
Absolutely.
Hey, I'd like to get your commitment that you're going to do this again with me. We're going to talk about, there's so many things that we could talk about. Like I want to talk about code systems. I want to talk about how fire represents coding collections. Yeah. I have like a million things. Can I get your pre-agreement?
I will pre-agree right now.
Right.
Put in for it. I will come back for it. This is again. I've told you I've listened to the last 6 or 7 for. I'm going to go back and listen to the whole 40.
Well, if you go back too far, they get a little rough. I was new.
Well, that's okay because again, I'm doing this, and this is not easy to do, and there's a marketing benefit to podcast for it, but I think you're putting together an asset for all my informatics students. This is something to listen to learn, to have an engaged dialogue for it. And I think that you just do a great job, Charlie, at interacting with people on a personal basis because we're all humans. We're all trying to find our way through this muddled night and figure out how we make things a little bit better in the world before we're at the end of it. So.
And it's another thing about our industry, I think at one point you and I would have been considered to be competitors, right?
I think so.
And I think that I've had a whole bunch of people out there in the industry that have been in a competitive situation with me. And I don't know that I've met too many people that I don't genuinely really like. And I like the fact that in healthcare, even though we might be in a competitive situation, that doesn't mean we can't agree, we can't have conversations, we can't get along, we can't grab a drink. And so that's another great thing about this industry and the community.
I know I didn't come to healthcare to win. The winning for me is making patient care better, not having a successful business. I think the same with you, Charlie. Which is even though I competed with you in the past, I never really said anything bad about clinical architecture because you guys were doing good work. We're all rowing the boat. We'll see which boat moves forward at what pace for it, but we're all trying to make healthcare just a little bit better.
Absolutely. All right. Anything you want to share before we sign off?
No, thanks so much. I'm excited. I'll come back. You let me know when. For it, and
we'll make it a regular thing.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you, John. As always, thank you for listening. I'm Charlie Harp with
the Informonster Podcast.
Well, no, you say your name.
Oh, and John.
Let's say it together, on
the
Informonster Podcast. Thanks a lot.